Our next scene that we're going to design is a full page graphic, and our example here is going to look like this. So that when the trio operator is playing this graphic out, they're going to have a couple of options. One, they're going to be able to change out each one of these information things here. They're also going to have a choice between 3 headshots or 1 headshot, and also a choice between either choosing headshots or a full page text graphic. So this graphic is made up of several parts. We're going to start first with the background, then design the header, and then add the functionality for the main box here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and drag our picture into the background image. I'm going to go ahead and turn our foreground image off. Now, even though this is going to be a full page, this scene is going to be covered, but we'll just start with it here. I'm going to begin by adding a new group here, and we'll just drag new group down. I'm going to call this main. I'm going to add another group below that, and let's just call this background or back or something to that matter. We're going to go into the built-ins, into the geometry plugins. We're going to use a rectangle. I'm going to go into the rectangle editor, and I'm going to set the width to 1000, and I'm also going to set the height to 1000. I'm going to use my built-in color generator here within the rectangle to set it color. So I'm just going to set it dark blue roughly, and use these color swatches here to adjust the color. So I have a black and some blue. I'll just copy it down, something similar to that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this rectangle, and I'm going to drag the hexagon image down onto this rectangle. I'm going to place this forward in Z position, either 1 or 2. I'm going to go ahead into the image editor and scale the hexagon image down a little bit. I'm going to make sure that our scaling is set to locked. So however you want that hexagon image to present itself, you can scale it down that much. I'm going to come into our back group here, and then what I'm going to do is just use the rotation here a little bit. So we're going to have some three-dimensional depth to it. And if you need to, you can certainly scale this out a little bit more. So let's go to 1200 on the width, and you can see that it fills the gap there, which means I'll have to come into my texture one as well and set the width to 1200 for that as well. All right, so we're going to start with the headline now, and I'll turn my title area and safe area on. I'm going to use a rectangle again. So let's drag a rectangle down. I'm going to create a new group to put this headline in. So let's go ahead and rename this group headline. And this rectangle here is going to be called BG or something like that. I'm going to spread this rectangle out by going into the rectangle width. So let's spread it all the way out. We'll type in something like 750, and then we'll readjust this up on the Y scale. The height a little bit too much, so we'll go ahead and adjust the height down to 45 or so. I'm going to use the built-in rectangle color editor again and choose some type of blue color. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this down like that. You can choose whatever color you want, or if you want to kind of alpha these down a little bit and have it fade off in one of the corners, you can do that as well. To add a little bit of texture to it, I'm just going to go ahead and add a grade to it, or this gradient here. You can come in and play with the position and or scaling of it as well. When you move this, you can see how it's affecting that rectangle. Let's copy this BG rectangle, and we're going to call this one like the texture, BG texture or something like that. I'm going to change this gradient out for this split. And again, we'll go into the texture editor. I'm going to change my single scaling here. I'm going to adjust it down and then rotate it roughly about 34 again. I'm going to take the height of this rectangle down a little bit as well. And if you want it to kind of fade off again, we can use a gradient image, and I'm going to use this inheritable. So I drag the gradient image down, I slide the rectangle as a subcontainer of it, I click on the gradient image, turn on inheritable, and I'm going to change the unit to 2. Now I can really use this gradient here to make further adjustments. So for instance, if I want to rotate this 90 and spread this out, I can, and reposition the X and or Y to get the design or the look that I'm looking for this particular texture element. All right, we're just going to leave that as is and move on. I'm just going to group these two containers together, and we'll just call this like headline BG or something that to that extent. I'm going to close this group. I'm going to add a new group, and this is where my headline text or my headline banners will be, so you can rename this to whatever you want, just so we know. I'm going to go into my built-ins, grab a Nagi. I'm going to go into the Nagi editor, and I'm going to adjust the width to roughly around 550, and height we're going to take down as well. Let's move it up a while to see exactly where we're at. So maybe we place it somewhere right around there roughly. The height, let's take down to 45. Each bevel or each corner I'm going to take down to 0 and set the stretch to 60. I'm going to go into my server and I'm going to add a blue material on it. So I'm just going to drag one of these blue materials on it. I'm going to go into my image. I'm also going to add some type of texture. So I'll use this gradient 2 texture on it. So I'm just going to move the position X up something like that for this particular gradient. I'm going to go ahead and copy that Nagi. I'm going to get rid of the gradient on it. I'm going to get rid of the image on it. I'm going to click on the Nagi. I'm going to change the geometry type from area to outline. Now we have a stroked outline. All right, so since those two are done, I'm just going to go ahead and group those together and rename that group. This is like our blue headline banner. You can name it accordingly to whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and take one of these Nagis and copy that as well. And I will regroup that just to reorganize it. This is going to be our subline group. I want to readjust the position of that Nagi. I don't want the blue on it anymore. So what I'm going to do is actually replace it with this white box. And I'm going to go ahead into the image editor, click on mapping, and make that vertex. I'm going to reset the position of that so that it fills. I'm going to go ahead and start to reposition this. I don't want it that high or that thick, so I'm going to adjust the height again down to 30 or so and just readjust the position. However you want to line it up, if you want to line it up like that, or I'm just going to leave it offset a little bit like that. Now if you want to go ahead and add that hexagon texture to it as well, so I'll just go ahead and do this and we'll move that forward one. We'll go into the image editor, change this to linear. Our scaling is set to locked, and I'm just going to go ahead and scale that down. I'm also going to add a little alpha to that to add some transparency to it so that we just see a little bit of the texture. Okay, so now that we have this striped texture up here, I'm going to borrow that. So I'm going to go ahead up and just copy that, drag it down into this group. I'm going to click on that group that I just copied and move this down. Now I want to make the height a lot smaller, so I'm going to go into the rectangle and just adjust the height and the width of that to bring it down. And if you want to make the image a little bit smaller or thinner, you can go ahead into the image editor and adjust that as well. We can position this wherever we want. I'm just going to leave it here right now as a design element. We can tweak that later as we go on. I'm going to go ahead and add one more group here to finish off this headline. And this is going to be our headline text group. So I'll just go ahead and name this something. I'm going to go into our fonts. I'm going to grab a font here and let's call this one headline. We'll click in the font editor. We'll go ahead and change this. We'll say this is going to be our headline text. I'll change the type from geometry to texture. We'll go ahead and move this forward in Z position. We'll move it up to reposition it. And however big or small you want it, we'll just scale it down to about something like that right there. We'll go back into the text. If you want to add a shadow, you can. So we'll go into the shadow tab, turn on the shadow button, adjust the color to black or whatever color you want. We'll adjust the distance down here. We do have other options for a blurred font, so I'm just going to go ahead and set that to a blurred font. We do want the max size on it, so I'm going to go into our container plugins, into the tools folder, drag the max size onto this headline as well. Go into the max size plugin. We'll take this down to about 6 or 7. We'll change our max width here to 850 and come back into the text and start typing. So when we type, it reaches the end there. It looks like we were just about right on. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Let's go ahead and copy this text. We'll call this subline text. We're going to reposition this down. And instead of having the white text, let's add a material on it. So we'll go into our materials add black, blue, whichever you want. I'm going to turn the shadow off, so I'm going to go into the text editor, turn the shadow button off. I'm going to go into my max size, readjust the size, so we'll go down to 0.5. If you want to test it to see where the max size ends, we can type it in there. We could add a little bit more to it if you want to fit more text on there, so let's adjust that out to about 900. And you can go ahead and change this text if you want. Instead of headline, we can just type subline text. Here you can reposition it however you want. We have it all set up, so I'm just going to leave it left justified like that. Now we need to go in and start adding the full page information. I'm going to start a new group here. This is going to be our BG box, which contains everything. I'm going to go into the built-ins, geometry plugins, rectangle, and I'm just going to scale this up. So I'm going to use the width and the height here to adjust the rectangle. So let's go out to about 550 maybe, and height wise we'll bring this up to about 500 and see where we're at. Now we do have our background rotated, so when we're adjusting our position here of this box, you can see how it looks like it's getting cut off. It's getting cut off because of the Z position. So what we can do is either move that background back or move this rectangle forward. So I'm going to go ahead and move this forward a little bit, and maybe we can back off the size of this rectangle. So I'll go ahead and readjust the height and the width of it as well. So let's a couple more tweaks, and we'll just move it over just a little bit like that. I'm going to use the rectangle editor to make some colors. So I'm going to turn the use vertex colors on. I'm going to make this one bluish. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy them down. Maybe we'll make the lower right and the lower left black. Again, we have the alphas, so we can bring some of this down too if we want to see a little bit of transparency in that as well. I'm going to go ahead and copy that rectangle. I'm going to use the expert here to make a stroke around it. So I'm going to turn the draw mode to outline. I'm going to go into the rectangle editor. I'm going to bring all these alphas back up. And you can see that thin blue line around that rectangle now. First thing that we need is some full page text. So I'm going to add a new group here. And this is going to be our choice of text or pictures, let's say. So if you want to put some type of naming convention in there, that's fine. I'm going to add another group as below that. This is going to be our full page text group. And I'm going to go into the server. I'm going to grab a font here to work with. I'm going to drag a font down, and we're going to bring this forward so that it's above the blue box. We're going to reposition it, maybe scale it. I'm going to change the type here from geometry to texture, and again, however big we want to make it, we can. So we're going to leave the text as is for a moment, but the one thing that we do want to do is kind of constrain this to fit within the box. So I'm going to come into this special tab. I'm going to turn this on. If your bounding box is not on, you should turn that on, and then we'll be able to see our text or our bounding box when we turn this text box on. So when we do that, we see this orange box around it. What we want to do is adjust the width here, and you can follow how wide it is by that orange box. We're going to adjust the height a little bit as well. We're going to set the space here to space as opposed to any, so that it will wrap on the space. So that when you come in here and you start typing and you put a space anywhere, it's going to automatically fit within this box. So it doesn't matter what you type, it's automatically going to wrap. And again, sizing and everything like that, that's up to you. So for right now, we're just going to keep this as is. We're just going to type full page text information goes here. If you want to add a drop shadow, you can come into the shadow box. We can turn on the shadow. We can adjust our color, adjust the distance. I have one font blurred here underneath, so I'm going to use the blurred font to add the shadow. Again, in our basic, we also have a tracking and a leading. So if you want to adjust the leading a little bit, you can add that there as well. Don't forget your orientation. However you want this orientation set, you can set it to center or left. For right now, I'm just going to leave it to left. So that's set up. I'm going to leave as is. I'm going to rename this container before I close it, and we'll just call this full page text. I'm going to turn that off for a moment. I'm going to add a new group here, and this is going to be our pictures or headshots or however you want to name it. We're also going to have a choice in here, so we're going to need to start building things within a main group. So I'm going to start adding a group here, and this is going to be HS1 or headshot 1. And I'm going to start by using a rectangle to create a background image, and I'm going to bring this forward. In fact, I'm just going to bring the whole group forward so that our rectangle is above our blue box here. All right, I'm going to go into this rectangle again, use vertex colors. I'm going to turn this on, change it to blue, and I'm just going to copy this down like this. I'm also maybe change one color out to black or something like that, just to give us a little bit of variation on it. I'm also going to use the alphas here on the upper left, so I'm going to take these down a little bit just to see a little bit behind it. So that's going to be one of our back plates. I'm going to copy that. I'm just going to add an expert to it, and we're going to turn the outline mode on the expert. I'm going to go back into our rectangle. I'm going to take each one of these back up to 100 so that now we should have some type of thin stroked line on that rectangle. This is where our headshots are going to go. So I'm going to copy this rectangle one more time. Let's get rid of that expert on it. I'm going to go into my server. Here, I cut out some headshots. These headshots have a key image or an alpha channel attached to them, and each one of these headshots are the exact same size. So if we're dealing with multiple headshots that we need to swap out, you'll want to make them all the same size so that they'll work with this graphic. I'm going to go ahead into my rectangle, and I'm going to turn off use vertex colors. We have a couple adjustments that we can or need to make here. So if you want to adjust the scaling of the headshot, we can scale it up just a little bit like that. It all depends how you want the shoulders to be cut off and stuff like that. Your other option would be to just adjust the size of the rectangle. I'm just adjusting the size of the headshot so we can now move on. I'm going to add a couple more elements here. So we also will want perhaps the name of this player. So let's add like a name box here. I'm going to go ahead into the built-ins. I'm going to grab a Nagi. I'm going to go into the server and just add the white box to this. Let's go ahead into the transformation editor and move this up in Z position so that it's in front of the blue box there, something right around 130. I'm going to reposition this down. Let's go into the Nagi. I know I want the width to be about roughly about that. I'm going to go ahead and take the height down to around 27. I'm going to take each bevel down to 0. And I'm going to set the stretch to about 60 again. Maybe we'll spread the width out a little bit more just to give us a little bit more room to type the name. I'm going to move this down right below him right there. I'm going to click on the image and change the image mapping to vertex. If you want to make an outline or a stroke for this, I'm going to go ahead and just copy that Nagi. We'll get rid of that image on it. We'll go ahead and replace it with a material. I'm going to click on the Nagi, change the geometry type from area to outline. And if you want to increase the outline width, there's an option here for outline width. We'll reset it to 1, maybe change the material out so that we'll see it a little bit better. All right, so that's one box. Our name is going to go in, and then we're going to have another maybe info box below that just to add some additional information. We don't want the Nagis, so I'm going to use a rectangle instead of that. So I'm going to go up into the built-ins, drag a rectangle into that box. I'm going to move the Z position out again so that it's ahead of the blue background box. Let's go ahead and position this down. We're going to adjust the height here and the width to roughly the same size of our headshot image. We'll reposition that again, and instead of having a filled area, I'm going to use the expert here to stroke it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the outline on. I'm going to use a bluish image here just to create an outline. And if we do want to copy this and have like a slight color background for this information, I'm going to go in and take the expert off and the material off. I'm going to go into the rectangle. We'll change our colors here. So we'll turn the use vertex colors on. We'll make a bluish or a black color here and copy these down into these squares. I'm also going to just adjust the alpha on this as well. Let's set up our text here. So we'll go into our fonts, into our server, into the right folder, and drag a font down. So first, let's work on the name So I'm going to drag the font down into our name box. Let's call this name. We'll bring it forward so that the Z position is correct. We'll scale this down, and let's go into the font editor here. First, I'm going to change the type. Let's say this is player name, and then we'll reposition this down. We're going to add a material to that, so we'll go add a black or a blue material to it. We don't want it to go outside of the Nagi there, so that means we're going to need the max size. We'll go into the container plugins, into the tools, and drag the max size plugin down onto this font. We'll go into the max size. Let's take this down to roughly 4, maybe 3, and we'll see how that works out. We'll take the max width maybe down to like 400, and let's test how that works. So if we slide this over a little bit more where it's going to start, and we type in here 400s, too much, we'll try 350 and come back in, types more text. Looks fairly good. I think we'll go with it and move on. Now we need some text for the info box. So let's just take the text that we just set up and copy that down into the info box. We'll go into the info box text. We'll move the position down. We'll get rid of the black material. Now we have a max size on that, but we could also swap that out to use a text box. For instance, if we want to get rid of the max size, we'll go to the special box. We'll turn on the bounding box, turn the text box on. You can see our orange box here, and we'll just adjust it to the same width as this player information box here. So as I adjust the height, you'll be able to see where that ends. Now everything is going to constrain and wrap within that box. We'll go ahead and change this from player name to player information or something like that, so that we'll be able to type that in there. Okay, that's roughly set up. I'm going to go ahead and close this container. I'm also going to copy this container 2 more times because we want up to 3 headshots. So now I have 3 containers here with a headshot. I'm going to go ahead and group these 3 together. And let's call this container here headshots choice or something like that. Now I want to spread these out, so I could manually do that by going into the transformation editor. However, there is a plugin that we can use that will spread it out evenly. I'm going to go into our built-ins, into the container plugins, into the arrange. I'm going to drag this grid arrange onto this headshot choice. I'm going to say number of columns, I want 3. And then I'm going to say column offset. I'm just going to spread these out until I see an equal number of distance between these Nagis here. So I can come back into this group, and we're going to reposition these over to recenter them roughly within this blue box here. So somewhere right around there, something like that, we can go with. All right, so we're done with that grid arrange. We can get rid of that. So I need to start setting this up for Trio and adding some functionality for it. So that's what we're going to do next.